The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen as 16-year-old Lily stared at her reflection in the window. Today felt different. Today, everything was about to change. Her mom had been acting nervous all morning, constantly checking her hair, in the mirror and smoothing down her dress. The reason was simple. Today was the day she was marrying David, and Lily wasn't sure how she felt about it. David had been dating her mom for 2 years now. He was nothing like her biological father, who had left when she was just 8 years old. Where her real dad had been distant and cold, David was warm and always ready with a joke. Where her father had barely acknowledged her existence, David actually listened when she talked about school or her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. But there was one thing that made Lily's stomach twist with worry. David was black, and she was white. In their small town of Riverside, this wasn't exactly common. She had already noticed the stares when they went out to dinner as a family. She had heard the whispered conversations that suddenly stopped when she walked by. And tomorrow she would have to face her classmates at Preston Academy, one of the most expensive private schools in the area. The wedding ceremony was beautiful. David's eyes filled with tears as her mom walked down the aisle, and Lily couldn't help but smile at how happy her mother looked. She hadn't seen her mom this radiant since before the divorce. During the reception, David pulled Lily aside for a quiet conversation. "I know this is a big change for you," he said, his voice gentle but sincere. "I'm not trying to replace your dad. I just want to be someone you can count on." Lily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Part of her really wanted to believe him, but another part was terrified of what people would say. The first few weeks of living together went smoother than expected. David owned a small auto repair shop downtown, and he would often come home with grease under his fingernails and stories about the interesting customers he had met that day. He never complained about the long hours or the physical work. Instead, he seemed genuinely happy with his life. Every morning he would make breakfast for the family, usually pancakes or scrambled eggs, and he always made sure Lily had everything she needed for school. He would ask about her homework and offer to help, even though math had never been his strongest subject. When her mom worked late at the hospital where she was a nurse, David would pick up Chinese takeout, and they would eat while watching old movies together. But school was a different story entirely. Preston Academy was the kind of place where most kids arrived in luxury cars driven by private chauffeurs. The student parking lot looked like a showroom for expensive vehicles. Everyone seemed to know everyone else's family history, their parents, jobs, and exactly how much money each family had. Lily had always felt somewhat out of place there, even before David came into the picture. Her mom worked hard to afford the tuition, believing that a good education was worth any sacrifice. But now, with David as her stepfather, she felt even more like an outsider. The first incident happened during lunch on a Tuesday afternoon. Lily was sitting with a group of girls she had known since freshman year when one of them, a girl named Ashley, casually asked about her new family situation. "So, your mom really married a mechanic?" Ashley asked, twirling her salad fork between her fingers. "That's so interesting." The way she said interesting made it clear she meant something else entirely. Lily felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "He's a good guy," Lily replied quietly, hoping to end the conversation. "Oh, I'm sure he is," another girl chimed in. "It's just that your families are so different." They didn't say it directly, but Lily knew what they meant. She excused herself from the table and spent the rest of lunch period hiding in the library. Things got worse during parent-teacher conferences. When David showed up in his work clothes, having come straight from the shop, Lily noticed how some of the other parents looked at him. Their expressions ranged from confused to disapproving. One mother actually moved her purse to her other arm. When David walked past, Mrs. Henderson, Lily's English teacher, seemed surprised when David introduced himself as Lily's stepfather. She kept glancing back and forth between them as if trying to solve a puzzle. During their meeting, she spoke slowly and used simpler words than usual, as if she assumed David wouldn't understand complex educational terms. David handled it all, with grace, asking thoughtful questions about Lily's progress and taking notes about ways he could help her at home. But Lily could see the slight tightness around his eyes that meant he was bothered by the treatment. even if he would never say anything about it. The worst part was how ashamed Lily felt about being ashamed. David had never been anything but kind to her and her mother. He worked hard, paid his bills, and treated their family with respect and love. She knew in her heart that he was a good man, maybe even a better man than her biological father had ever been. But when she was at school, surrounded by her classmates' judgment and assumptions, she found herself making excuses. When someone asked about her family, she would talk about her mom's job at the hospital but conveniently forget to mention David. When school events required parent attendance, she would hope her mom could come alone. The internal conflict was eating her alive. At home, she genuinely enjoyed David's company. He had a great sense of humor and could fix almost anything that broke around the house. He never raised his voice even when he was frustrated, and he always asked for her opinion before making decisions that affected the family. But at school, all she could think about were the stares, the whispered comments, and the way some of her classmates looked at her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. She started eating lunch alone more often, claiming she needed to study. She stopped mentioning family activities when her friends talked about their weekend plans. One evening, while David was helping her with her chemistry homework, she almost broke down and told him everything. The words were right there, ready to spill out, but she couldn't bring herself to hurt him with the truth about how cruel some people could be. Instead, she just said, "Thank you for helping me with this. I really appreciate it." David smiled and ruffled her hair gently. "That's what families do for each other, kiddo. We look out for one another." As Lily lay in bed that night, she wondered if she was strong enough to live up to that promise. She wanted to be the kind of person who could stand up for what was right, who could defend the people she cared about. But she was 16 years old, and fitting in felt more important than anything else in the world. Little did she know that her stepfather was hiding secrets of his own. Secrets that would soon change everything she thought she knew about courage, honor, and what it really meant to be a hero. Senior year was supposed to be the best year of high school, but for Lily it felt more like walking through a minefield every single day. The summer had passed quickly, and she had hoped that maybe things would be different when she returned to Preston Academy. Maybe people would have forgotten about her family situation, or maybe they would have found something else to gossip about. She was wrong. If anything, the whispers had gotten louder, and the stares had become more obvious. It seemed like everyone had spent their summer vacation discussing her family, and now they felt comfortable enough to make their opinions known. The first week back, Lily was standing at her locker when she overheard two girls talking behind her. "I still can't believe her mom actually went through with it," one of them said, not bothering to lower her voice. "I know, right? My mom says it's probably just a phase. You know how some women get after a divorce," the other replied with a laugh. Lily's hands trembled as she fumbled with her combination lock. She pretended not to hear them, but every word felt like a punch to the stomach. Things got worse during the college prep meetings. Preston Academy prided itself on sending students to the best universities in the country, and senior year was all about applications, essays, and planning for the future. During one of these meetings, Mrs. Patterson, the guidance counselor, was discussing family income and financial aid options. "Now, some of you may need to consider schools that offer more generous financial assistance," she said, her eyes briefly landing on Lily, "especially those whose family situations have changed recently." The implication was clear. Everyone knew that David worked as a mechanic, and in a school where most parents were doctors, lawyers, or business executives, that automatically meant Lily's family was now considered poor. Rachel, one of the popular girls, raised her hand with a fake, concerned expression. "Mrs. Patterson, what if someone's parents can't really afford to help with college? Like, what if their stepdad works with his hands instead of, having a real career?" The question was obviously directed at Lily, and she felt her face burn with embarrassment. Several students turned to look at her, some with pity, others with barely concealed amusement. "All honest work is valuable," Mrs. Patterson replied diplomatically, but even she seemed uncomfortable with the question. After the meeting, Lily found herself surrounded by a group of classmates in the hallway. Rachel led the pack, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Lily, we're just worried about you," she said, placing a hand on Lily's arm. "I mean, it must be so hard having a stepdad who can't really provide for your family the way your real dad could." "My real dad never provided anything," Lily muttered, trying to pull away. "Oh, honey, that's not what I heard," another girl chimed in. "My mom knows your mom from the country club, and she said your dad was actually pretty successful before the divorce. It's such a shame your mom had to settle for, well, you know." The words stung because there was a tiny grain of truth in them. Her biological father had made good money, but he had also been absent, cold, and ultimately abandoned his family. David might not make as much money, but he was present, caring and committed to their family. But trying to explain that to these girls felt impossible. How could she make them understand that love and character mattered more than a bank account? Balance? The harassment wasn't limited to just the girls. Some of the boys had their own way of making Lily feel unwelcome. During lunch one day, she was walking past a table of football players when one of them called out to her, "Hey Lily, does your stepdad work on fancy cars like ours, or just the beat-up ones?" The table erupted in laughter, and Lily quickened her pace, hoping to escape before they said anything worse. "Maybe we should bring our cars to him," another boy added loudly. "I bet he'd give us a family discount." More laughter followed, and Lily felt tears pricking at her eyes. She ducked into the nearest bathroom and locked herself in a stall, trying to compose herself before her next class. The worst incident happened during the annual fundraising committee meeting for the school's charity gala. Lily had volunteered to be part of the planning committee, hoping it would help her feel more connected to the school community. Instead, it became another opportunity for her classmates to remind her that she didn't belong. The meeting was held in the school's conference room with about 15 students discussing theme ideas and fundraising goals. When the topic of parent volunteers came up, Rachel made what seemed like an innocent suggestion. "We should probably be careful about which parents we ask to help with the more visible roles," she said, shuffling through some papers. "You know, for the sake of the school's image." "What do you mean?" asked Tom, one of the few students who had always been kind to Lily. Rachel glanced meaningfully at Lily before continuing. "Well, some parents are just more appropriate for certain types of events. We want donors to feel comfortable, right?" The implication was crystal clear. David, with his work clothes and calloused hands, wouldn't be the right kind of parent to represent Preston Academy at a fancy fundraising gala. Lily felt something inside her break. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Are you saying my stepdad isn't good enough to volunteer at a school event?" she asked, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. The room fell silent. Rachel looked momentarily surprised that Lily had finally spoken up, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, Lily, I wasn't talking about anyone specifically," she said with a patronizing smile. "I just think we should consider what's best for the school. Your stepdad seems like a very nice man, but let's be honest about what kind of impression we want to make on potential donors." Several other students nodded in agreement, and Lily realized that this wasn't just Rachel's opinion. This was how most of her classmates felt about David, about her family, and about her. She grabbed her backpack and walked out of the meeting without another word. In the hallway, she could hear muffled laughter coming from the conference room, and she knew they were talking about her. That night at dinner, David noticed that Lily was quieter than usual. Her mom was working a late shift at the hospital, so it was just the two of them sharing a pizza and watching the news. "Everything okay at school?" he asked gently. Lily looked at him across the table. He had changed out of his work clothes and into a clean t-shirt, but she could still see the small scar on his hand from where he had cut himself fixing a car last month. His face was kind and concerned, and she felt a wave of guilt wash over her. "Yeah, everything's fine," she lied. David studied her face for a moment, and she could tell he didn't believe her. But he didn't push the issue. Instead, he reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? I may not have all the answers, but I'm a pretty good listener." Lily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. How could she tell him that his presence in her life had made her a target? How could she explain that people looked down on him because of his job, his background and the color of his skin. Instead, she squeezed his hand back and tried to smile. But inside, she felt like she was drowning in shame and confusion, caught between her love for her stepfather and her desperate need to fit in with her peers. She had no idea that David was carrying secrets of his own, secrets that would soon change everything she thought she knew about strength, courage, and what it really meant to be worthy of respect. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when Lily's world turned completely upside down. She had been looking for her old photo albums in the attic, wanting to put together a memory book for her mom's upcoming birthday. The wooden floorboards creaked under her feet as she moved boxes around, searching through years of stored memories. That's when she found it. Hidden behind a stack of her mom's nursing textbooks was a dusty cardboard box with David's name written on it in faded black marker. At first she hesitated. Going through someone else's personal belongings felt wrong, like reading someone's diary. But curiosity got the better of her. Inside the box, her fingers touched something cold and metallic. She pulled out what looked like a small bronze star attached to a colorful ribbon, then another medal, and another. Her heart started beating faster as she realized what she was looking at. Military medals. Lots of them. There were certificates, too, with official government seals and David's full name printed in bold letters. Purple Heart, Bronze Star Medal, Combat Medical Badge, Army Commendation Medal. The words swam before her eyes as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. David had been a soldier. Not just any soldier, but a decorated war hero. With trembling hands, she pulled out a photograph that made her breath catch in her throat. It showed a younger version of David, wearing military fatigues and standing next to an ambulance in what looked like a desert. His face was thinner, more serious, but his eyes held the same kindness she knew so well. On the back, someone had written, Afghanistan, 2018, Doc saves another life. There were more photos. David treating wounded soldiers, David receiving medals from high-ranking officers, David with his medical unit, all of them looking tired but proud. In every single photo, he looked like a hero straight out of a movie. At the bottom of the box, she found letters, dozens of them. Letters from soldiers thanking David for saving their lives. Letters from families grateful that their sons and daughters had come home because of his medical skills. Letters from commanding officers praising his bravery under fire. One letter, written in shaky handwriting, particularly caught her attention. It was from a soldier named Kevin. Doc, I know you probably don't remember me, but you saved my life in Kandahar when that bomb went off. I was bleeding out and everyone thought I was gone. But you didn't give up on me. You worked on me for 40 minutes straight while bullets were flying over our heads. Because of you, I got to come home to my wife and kids. I named my son David, after you. Thank you for being the kind of man who runs toward danger when everyone else runs away. Lily's hands were shaking as she read letter after letter, each one painting a picture of David that was completely different from the quiet mechanic she thought she knew. This wasn't just some guy who fixed cars for a living. This was a man who had risked his life repeatedly to save others. This was a genuine hero. She carefully put everything back in the box and climbed down from the attic, her mind spinning with questions. Why had David never mentioned his military service? Why was he working as a mechanic when he clearly had medical training? And why did he let people at school treat him like he was just some uneducated guy who wasn't good enough for their community? That evening, she watched David differently during dinner. He was helping her mom prepare spaghetti, joking about his terrible cooking skills and asking about Lily's plans for the weekend. He seemed so normal, so ordinary. But now she knew there was nothing ordinary about him at all. Over the next few days, she started paying attention to things she had never noticed before, like how David always seemed to know when someone was hurt or upset, even before they said anything. How he could bandage cuts and scrapes with professional precision, how he remained calm in stressful situations when everyone else was panicking. She also noticed how he sometimes got a distant look in his eyes, especially when there were loud noises or when war scenes came on television. Her mom would quietly change the channel when that happened, and now Lily understood why. The pieces of the puzzle started falling into place when she overheard a phone conversation David was having in the garage. She had gone out to ask him something about homework when she heard him talking to someone. "Yeah, I'll be there Tuesday night," he was saying. "Tommy's having a rough time adjusting, and I think hearing from someone who's been through it might help." There was a pause, then David continued. "I know it's hard, man. The nightmares, the guilt, feeling like nobody understands what you've been through. But it gets better. You just have to take it one day at a time." After he hung up, Lily quietly approached him. "David, who was that?" He looked startled for a moment, like he hadn't expected anyone to overhear. "Oh, just a friend who needed some advice." But Lily could tell there was more to it than that. Over the next week, she started paying attention to where David went on, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. He always said he was going to meet some friends, but he never gave any details. Finally, her curiosity got the best of her. One Thursday evening, she asked her mom if she could borrow the car to go to the library. Instead, she followed David. He drove to a building downtown that she had passed many times but never really noticed. The sign out front read, "Veterans Community Center." Through the window, she could see David sitting in a circle with about 10 other men and women, all of them listening intently as one person shared his story. Lily sat in her car, watching in amazement as David nodded encouragingly and occasionally spoke up to offer advice or support. These people clearly respected him, looked up to him, and valued his opinion. He wasn't just attending these meetings. He was helping to lead them. Later that week, she decided to do some research online. She typed David's full name into a search engine along with the word veteran and was shocked by what she found. There were newspaper articles about his unit's heroic actions in Afghanistan, photos of David receiving commendations, even a short documentary video about combat medics that featured an interview with him, talking about the importance of never giving up on a wounded soldier. In the video, David looked directly into the camera and said, "People think being brave means not being scared, but real courage is being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. When someone is hurt and needs help, you don't think about the danger, you just act." Lily watched the video 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This was the man her classmates made fun of. This was the person they thought wasn't good enough to volunteer at their school events. This was the hero they dismissed as just a mechanic. She started understanding why David had chosen his current life. After years of intense pressure, life or death situations, and unimaginable stress, maybe fixing cars in a quiet garage felt peaceful. Maybe helping people with everyday problems was his way of healing from the trauma of war. But she also realized something else. David wasn't hiding his past because he was ashamed of it. He was protecting his family from the weight of it. He didn't want to be seen as different or treated with pity. He didn't want his war experiences to define him or make people uncomfortable around him. He just wanted to be a normal guy, living a normal life, taking care of the people he loved. As she sat in her room that night, looking at her homework but unable to concentrate, Lily felt ashamed of herself in a completely new way. She had been embarrassed by David because of what other people thought, but those other people had no idea who he really was. They judged him based on his job, his appearance, and their own narrow-minded assumptions. The truth was, David was probably the most extraordinary person any of them had ever met, and tomorrow she would have to face her classmates knowing that they were mocking a genuine American hero, someone who had literally saved lives and served his country with honor. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Heritage Day at Preston Academy was supposed to be one of the school's most celebrated events. Students spent weeks preparing presentations about their family backgrounds, cultural traditions, and personal stories. The auditorium was decorated with flags from around the world, and parents filled the seats proud to watch their children share their heritage with the school community. Lily had struggled with what to present. How could she talk about her heritage when she felt so conflicted about her own family? She had finally decided on a simple presentation about her grandmother's immigration from Ireland, carefully avoiding any mention of David or the complex dynamics of her current family situation. As she sat backstage waiting for her turn, she could hear the enthusiastic applause from the audience. Student after student took the stage, sharing stories of successful parents, family businesses, and proud traditions. Rachel had just finished a presentation about her family's law firm, which had been in business for 3 generations. The audience loved it. David was sitting in the back row of the auditorium just as he had promised. He had taken time off work to be there even though Lily had told him he didn't need to come. When she peeked through the curtain, she could see him in his cleanest jeans and a button-down shirt, looking slightly out of place among the sea of business suits and designer dresses worn by the other parents. Her mom was supposed to be there, too, but she had been called in for an emergency surgery at the hospital. So David sat alone, occasionally checking his phone, but mostly just watching the stage with a gentle smile on his face. The next presenter was Kevin, a junior who was known for being somewhat dramatic. He had chosen to talk about his grandfather's service in World War II, and he was really getting into the story, gesturing wildly as he spoke about battles and heroism. "My grandfather was a real American hero," Kevin declared, his voice rising with emotion. "He fought in Europe and saved countless lives. He taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared." The audience was completely engaged, hanging on every word. Kevin was building up to his big finale when suddenly, something went wrong. In the middle of his sentence, Kevin's face went pale. He stumbled slightly, then grabbed his chest. For a moment, everyone thought it was part of his performance. But then Kevin collapsed onto the stage with a loud thud that echoed through the silent auditorium. The silence lasted only a few seconds before chaos erupted. Students in the audience began screaming. Teachers rushed toward the stage, but they seemed frozen, unsure of what to do. Mrs. Patterson was shouting for someone to call an ambulance while Mr. Rodriguez, the drama teacher, knelt beside Kevin but clearly had no idea how to help. Kevin wasn't moving. His lips were turning blue and his breathing was shallow and irregular. In the audience, his parents were trying to push through the crowd to reach their son, his mother crying hysterically. That's when David moved. While everyone else was panicking, shouting, or standing frozen in shock, David was already out of his seat and moving toward the stage with purpose and determination. He didn't run, but he moved with the confident stride of someone who had been in crisis situations before. "Step back, please," he said firmly but calmly as he climbed onto the stage. His voice wasn't loud, but something about his tone made everyone listen. "Give him some space to breathe." David knelt beside Kevin and immediately began checking for vital signs. His hands moved with practiced precision, checking Kevin's pulse, tilting his head back to open his airway, and placing his ear near Kevin's mouth to listen for breathing. "He's in cardiac arrest," David announced, his voice steady and clear. "Someone call 911 now and tell them we have a 17-year-old male in cardiac arrest. Ask for an ETA on the ambulance." Without waiting for a response, David positioned his hands on Kevin's chest and began CPR. His movements were textbook perfect. 30 chest compressions followed by 2 rescue breaths, repeated in a steady rhythm that showed years of training and experience. The entire auditorium watched in stunned silence as this man they had dismissed as just a mechanic worked to save a young life. David's face was focused and determined, sweat beading on his forehead as he continued the life-saving compressions. "Come on, Kevin," he said quietly between compressions. "Stay with us, son. Don't give up." Mrs. Patterson had managed to find the school's emergency defibrillator, and she brought it to David with shaking hands. Without missing a beat, David quickly attached the pads to Kevin's chest, following the device's automated instructions. "Everyone step back," he commanded, and the authority in his voice made everyone immediately comply. The defibrillator analyzed Kevin's heart rhythm and recommended a shock. David pressed the button without hesitation. Kevin's body jerked from the electrical shock, but he still wasn't breathing on his own. David immediately resumed CPR, his movements never faltering despite the physical strain. 5 minutes felt like 5 hours as he worked tirelessly to bring Kevin back. Then suddenly Kevin gasped. His eyes fluttered open and he began coughing. David quickly turned him onto his side to help him breathe better, one hand supporting Kevin's head while the other monitored his pulse. "That's it, buddy," David said softly, his voice filled with relief. "Just breathe. You're going to be okay." The ambulance arrived just as Kevin was starting to sit up, confused but clearly alive. The paramedics took over, but not before David gave them a quick professional briefing about what had happened, Kevin's condition, and exactly what treatment he had provided. "Are you medical personnel?" one of the paramedics asked David. "Former Army medic," David replied simply. As the paramedics prepared to transport Kevin to the hospital, his parents rushed onto the stage. Kevin's father, a prominent businessman, who had never given David a second glance at school events, grabbed David's hand with tears in his eyes. "You saved my son's life," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." David just squeezed his hand and said, "I'm just glad I was here to help." The principal, Dr. Williams, approached David as the ambulance was leaving. She had watched the entire event unfold, and her face showed a mixture of amazement and embarrassment. "Mr. Johnson," she said formally, "I think we all owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude. Would you mind if I asked you to stay for a moment? I'd like to address the audience." David looked uncomfortable with the attention, but he nodded. "Doctor." Williams walked to the microphone on the stage, her voice shaking slightly as she spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we just witnessed was nothing short of miraculous. Thanks to the quick thinking and expert medical skills of Mr. David Johnson, young Kevin's life was saved. Mr. Johnson, would you please come forward?" David reluctantly walked to the center of the stage. The audience, which had been whispering among themselves, fell completely silent. "Mr. Johnson is Lily Thompson's stepfather," Dr. Williams continued, "and as we just learned, he's also a decorated Army veteran and trained combat medic. His heroic actions today remind us that heroes come in many forms, and we are incredibly fortunate to have someone of his caliber in our school community." The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous ovation. Students and parents who had barely acknowledged David's presence before were now on their feet, clapping and cheering for the man who had just saved a young life before their very eyes. From backstage, Lily watched with tears streaming down her face. This was the moment everything changed. This was when everyone finally saw David for who he really was. Not just a mechanic, not just a stepfather, but a genuine hero who had once again answered the call when someone needed help. As the applause continued, David caught sight of Lily, watching from the wings. He gave her a small, modest smile and a thumbs up, as if to say everything was going to be okay. And for the first time in months, Lily believed him. The morning after Heritage Day felt like waking up in a completely different world. Lily's phone had been buzzing nonstop since she woke up, with messages from classmates she hadn't talked to in months. Everyone wanted to know about David, about his military service, about what it was like having a real hero as a stepfather. At breakfast, David was reading the local newspaper while sipping his coffee. The front page headline read, "Local Veteran Saves Student's Life at School Event." Below, it was a photo of David performing CPR on Kevin, his face focused and determined. The article described him as a humble hero who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic. "I can't believe they put this in the paper," David said, shaking his head with embarrassment. "I just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone could have done what you did," Lily's mom replied, squeezing his shoulder. "You saved that boy's life, David. That's not something to be modest about." Lily looked at David across the breakfast table. He seemed uncomfortable with all the attention, preferring to focus on his scrambled eggs rather than the newspaper article. This was so typical of him. Even when he was being celebrated as a hero, he just wanted to go back to his normal, quiet life. But normal wasn't going to be an option anymore. When Lily arrived at school, she immediately noticed that things were different. Students who had previously ignored her or made snide comments were now approaching her with genuine smiles and curiosity. "Lily, is it true your stepdad was a war hero?" asked Jessica, a girl from her chemistry class who had never spoken to her before. "We saw the video someone posted online of him saving Kevin," added another student. "That was incredible. He was so calm and professional." Even Rachel, who had been the source of so much of Lily's misery, approached her at her locker. "Hey, Lily," she said, her voice lacking its usual condescending tone. "I wanted to apologize for some of the things I said about your family. I clearly didn't know what I was talking about." Lily studied Rachel's face, trying to determine if this was genuine or just another form of manipulation. But Rachel's expression seemed sincere, maybe even a little ashamed. "Your stepdad is amazing," Rachel continued. "My dad works at the hospital, and he said the paramedics were really impressed with how David handled the situation. They said Kevin might not have made it if David hadn't been there." Throughout the day, teachers and students kept approaching Lily to ask about David. Mrs. Patterson, who had previously seemed to look down on him, now spoke about him with deep respect and admiration. "Your stepfather's actions yesterday were truly heroic," she told Lily during study hall. "I've been teaching here for 20 years and I've never seen anything like it. The way he took control of the situation and saved that young man's life, it was extraordinary." But the real transformation happened at lunch. For months, Lily had been eating alone or with just one or two friends, trying to avoid the popular table where Rachel and her group held court. Today, as she sat with her usual small group, she noticed several people from the popular table looking in her direction. Then something unprecedented happened. Tom, one of the football players who had previously made jokes about David, walked over to her table. "Hey, Lily," he said, looking slightly nervous. "I wanted to apologize for some of the stuff I said about your stepdad before. That was really ignorant of me. After seeing what he did yesterday, I realize he's probably one of the most impressive adults I've ever met." Other students began coming over to her table throughout the lunch period. Some wanted to apologize for their previous behavior. Others wanted to share stories about family members who had served in the military. A few just wanted to say how cool they thought it was that she had a hero living in her house. For the first time in months, Lily felt like she belonged at Preston Academy. The local newspaper article was just the beginning. By the end of the week, the story had been picked up by other news outlets. A local television station wanted to interview David, though he politely declined. Kevin's parents had started a social media campaign sharing the story of how David saved their son, and it was being shared thousands of times. The school board decided to hold a special assembly to honor David officially. Principal Williams called Lily into her office to discuss the details. "We'd like to present your stepfather with a commendation from the school," she explained. "We're also going to invite some other local veterans to attend, to honor all of their service. Would you help us convince him to accept the recognition?" That evening, Lily found David in the garage, working on their neighbor's car. Oil stained his hands and he looked completely absorbed in his work, like he had every day for the past 2 years. But now Lily saw him differently. She saw the skilled hands that had saved Kevin's life. She saw the calm demeanor that had kept everyone steady during a crisis. She saw the humble hero who just wanted to help people, whether that meant fixing their cars or saving their lives. "David," she said quietly, "the school wants to honor you at a special assembly. Will you do it?" He looked up from the engine, wiping his hands on a rag. "Lily, I appreciate it, but that's really not necessary. I don't need any recognition for doing what's right. But I need you to do it," Lily said, her voice stronger than she had expected. "Not for them, but for me. I want everyone to know how proud I am to be your stepdaughter." David's expression softened, and she could see that her words had touched him deeply. "Are you sure about that?" he asked gently. "I know things have been difficult for you at school because of me." "Because of other people's ignorance," Lily corrected. "Not because of you. You're the best man I know, David. You've been nothing but kind and supportive to me and Mom even when I didn't appreciate it. And now everyone else can see what I should have recognized all along." The special assembly was held the following Friday. The auditorium was packed not just with students and parents, but with local veterans, community leaders, and members of the media. David sat on the stage looking uncomfortable in his best suit, but Lily could see the pride in his eyes when he looked out at the audience. Principal Williams gave a speech about courage, service, and the importance of recognizing heroes in everyday life. Kevin, who had made a full recovery, spoke about how David's quick actions had saved his life and how grateful his family would always be. Then it was Lily's turn to speak. She had volunteered to introduce David, and as she walked to the microphone, she felt more confident than she had in months. 2 years ago, my mom married David Johnson, she began, her voice clear and strong. At first, I was embarrassed. I was worried about what people would think about our family. I was ashamed of things that I should have been proud of. She paused, looking directly at David, who was watching her with tears in his eyes. David served our country with honor and distinction. He saved lives on the battlefield, and he's been saving lives ever since he came home. He saved my family by bringing love, stability, and kindness into our lives. And last week, he saved Kevin's life by being exactly who he's always been, a hero who runs toward danger when others run away. The applause was thunderous. Students and parents rose to their feet, giving David a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. As Lily looked out at the audience, she saw Rachel wiping tears from her eyes. She saw Kevin's parents beaming with gratitude. She saw her classmates looking at her with respect and admiration. But most importantly, she saw David standing up and walking toward the microphone with the quiet dignity that had always defined him. "Thank you," he said simply when the applause finally died down. But the real heroes are the people who choose kindness every day, who stand up for what's right, and who don't let other people's opinions define their worth. The real heroes are people like Lily, who just gave me the greatest gift anyone could ask for: acceptance and love. As they walked off the stage together, Lily felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for months. She was no longer ashamed of her family or worried about fitting in. She had learned that true respect comes not from what other people think, but from knowing who you are and being proud of the people you choose to love. And she had learned that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones living quietly in your own home, just waiting for the moment when their courage is needed most.